Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting back to a world where fast food didn't involve a glowing drive-through sign, but usually a man with a tray shouting in the street. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's wander into the surprisingly greasy corners of the Middle Ages. You might imagine medieval people living entirely on porridge and piety. That's a lovely myth, and it makes their lives seem nobler. The truth is, they adored snacks, and naturally, many of them were questionable. Not deadly, well, not usually, but questionable in ways that would leave modern nutritionists quietly sobbing into a kale smoothie. Let's start with the fairs and markets, the original food courts. A good medieval fair wasn't just about trading wool or listening to an underpaid jongler sing off-key ballads. It was an excuse to eat things you'd never find on your lord's table. There were honey cakes, sometimes overbaked and sometimes alarmingly underdone. Vendors sold them from baskets, the sugar attracting both customers and an enthusiastic population of flies. Then there were wafers, thin, sweet discs made on iron presses. They were often handed out at weddings or feasts, but street versions existed too, hawked near church doors after Mass. The idea was to lure worshippers with something lightly crispy, because obviously nothing complements spiritual reflection like a biscuit fried in mystery fat. Fried dough, by the way, is as old as humanity's bad decisions. Medieval cooks loved to dunk scraps of batter in hot oil, coat them in honey, and call it a day. Sometimes the batter included ale or wine, because why not? A 15th century recipe suggests adding a splash of beer to make the fritter light. That advice remains technically sound, though few medieval cooks would have fretted about yeast content or food safety. Let's drift over to the meatier options. Street vendors in London and Paris sold pies. Lots of pies. Most were tiny, handheld affairs filled with minced beef, pork, or something more mysterious that the chef declined to label. A pie's quality depended on the vendor's ethics and the day's luck. Some pies were divine. Others were structurally unsound, with fillings that suggested the animal had not led a happy or perhaps entirely legal life. And then there was pasty culture. In Cornwall and parts of northern France, people wrapped chopped meat and vegetables in pastry, baked them, and ate them on the go. Today that sounds normal, but back then it was revolutionary. A whole meal in one hand, freeing the other for gesturing, sword carrying, or simply clinging to your ale cup. Sweet treats existed too. Almonds were ground with sugar to make marchpane, what we'd call marzipan. It was molded into shapes, castles, animals, sometimes tiny bishops. People admired the sculptures, then ate them. There's something very medieval about destroying an edible bishop with your teeth after dinner. Of course, all this indulgence needed washing down. Ale was standard, even for children, because water could be risky. But for a true snack and beverage combo, imagine hot spiced wine. Sellers ladled it out from cauldrons at winter markets. The mix of red wine, honey, and cinnamon was warming, and mildly dangerous if the cook had been generous with the nutmeg, which in large doses acts less like a spice and more like a questionable life choice. Another favorite was posset, a warm mixture of milk curdled with ale or wine, then sweetened. It sounds horrifying. Milk meeting alcohol rarely ends well, but posset was beloved, especially late at night. People even prescribed it for colds. Whether it helped or not is uncertain, but it certainly encouraged sleep, or at least unconsciousness. Let's glide toward the royal kitchens, where junk food was relative. Kings and queens didn't exactly line up for greasy fritters, but they had their own guilty pleasures. Edward IV of England had a soft spot for sweetened claret. Isabella of Castile liked candied pine nuts. French nobles nibbled on dragees, little sugar-coated spices served at the end of meals, supposedly for digestion, though more likely for showing off that you could afford absurd amounts of imported sugar. And sugar, of course, was a luxury. By the later Middle Ages, Europeans were importing it from the Mediterranean, where it was grown with exhausting labor on plantations. So every sprinkle on a cake carried a whiff of far-off trade routes and someone else's blisters. Naturally, that didn't stop anyone from demanding more. Urban dwellers also flocked to cookshops. These were half tavern, half takeaway joint. You could walk in, order a slab of roast meat or a bowl of pottage, and eat it there or carry it home in your own dish. Imagine medieval delivery, except you were the courier, and you hoped no dogs intercepted your stew. For the working poor, cheap snacks were essential fuel. They grabbed chewit, a small meat pie, or nod on hot chestnuts in winter. In fishing towns, sellers offered fried eels, crispy, oily, and not for the faint of stomach. A chronicler once grumbled about boys and men forever munching eels on the bridge, which suggests either a thriving business or a severe traffic hazard. Not all treats aged well. Without refrigeration, anything creamy or fish-based had a terrifyingly brief window of safety. Food poisoning was common, though rarely documented in detail. Medieval writers preferred to blame stomach upsets on ill humors or divine disapproval rather than undercooked lamprey. Speaking of lampreys, they were a royal delicacy. Henry I of England allegedly died after eating a surfeit of lampreys. Historians debate whether that means too many eels or simply one eel too many hours past its prime. Either way, it's an impressively grim footnote to a reign. Let's pause for a gentle reminder. Medieval food wasn't all doom and dubious pies. Much of it was perfectly sensible fresh bread, seasonal fruits, vegetables, grilled fish. But we're here for the mischief, and the snacks supplied plenty. Picture a medieval child clutching a sticky honeycomb, hair matted with sweetness, or an apprentice sneaking a sliver of cheese from his master's pantry. Imagine students in Paris crowding around a vendor selling hippocras, a spiced wine so syrupy it left stains on lecture notes. These are the human moments behind the solemn portraits and illuminated manuscripts. As evening deepened, street food vendors lit small lanterns, their flames flickering across trays of tarts and nuts. City air smelled of wood smoke, roasted meat, and the faint metallic tang of coins changing hands. It was noisy, chaotic, and, if you ignored sanitation concerns, comforting. So, while the modern world thinks it invented late-night snacking, medieval people were already experts. They knew how to turn flour, fat, and questionable meat into something quick, hot, and just a little scandalous. And on that warm, mildly greasy note, let's drift toward another corner of history. Hey everyone, still cozy? Good. Let's let the medieval snacks fade into the background and drift further back to a world where people believed their nighttime brain fog was a secret telegram from the universe. Dreams, for most of history, were never just weird stuff your mind does while you sleep. They were messages, warnings, or sometimes elaborate excuses for why you needed another day off from plowing. Naturally, societies built entire professions around decoding them. The ancient Egyptians were among the first to treat dreams like a government file. They kept dream books, long lists explaining what each nocturnal oddity meant. If you dreamed of drinking cool water, that was good fortune. Dreaming of crocodiles? Also good fortune. Strangely enough, as long as the crocodile didn't eat you in the dream. It's unclear how the interpreter judged that nuance, but apparently there were rules. Egyptian priests doubled as sleep consultants. They'd suggest ritual baths, incense, or a small offering to a temple god before bed. This was called incubation, and the idea was that a deity, usually a helpful one like Serapis, might visit you during sleep with diagnostic advice. Imagine falling asleep on a temple mat while a priest quietly muttered, "Try not to roll onto the sacred cat." Moving east, Mesopotamian scholars also had their say. Clay tablets from Assyria contained dream dictionaries almost as long as the queues for tax collection. They divided visions into good and bad omens with an admirable lack of ambiguity. Dream of eating dates? Pleasant news is coming. Dream of eating too many dates? Possibly liver trouble, or just a warning not to be greedy. The Greeks took dream analysis to another level, because of course they did. They had a whole god for it, Morpheus, whose job was to shuffle into your head with whatever surrealist message Olympus wanted to send. Temples to Asclepius, the healing god, offered sleeping chambers. People would settle onto stone pallets, wait for drowsiness, and hope the god would prescribe treatment via dream. One can picture a priest standing nearby, nodding gravely as you muttered about flying cabbages. Greek writers also loved to theorize. Aristotle, forever unable to leave a topic alone, decided that dreams were just byproducts of digestion. If you ate spicy cheese before bed, your dreams were bound to be lively. He wasn't wrong, just maybe less poetic than people preferred. By the Roman era, dream interpretation had become social currency. Wealthy households sometimes hired specialists to hover around and declare whether last night's dream about purple ducks meant promotion or doom. The Emperor Augustus allegedly paid attention to such readings, though it's hard to imagine running an empire while also tracking poultry symbolism. Let's drift gently to the Middle Ages, where Christian scholars viewed dreams with suspicion. They might be messages from God or the devil sneaking in with unsettling imagery. Saints reported luminous visions full of angels, while ordinary folk worried that a dream about eating cheese on Friday might end in ecclesiastical reprimand. Monastic writers recommended a calm evening meal, modest bedding, and a prayer if you hoped for clean dreams, meaning ones unlikely to require confession at sunrise. Yet, despite theological frowns, medieval people still swapped dream stories with enthusiasm. A merchant might tell a companion about a mysterious figure pointing at his account book, and the friend would murmur, "Clearly, you should double-check the barley receipts." Housewives dreamed of lost rings and were told they'd find money, or lose it, depending on who did the interpreting. In Islamic scholarship, dream reading reached remarkable sophistication. Thinkers like Ibn Siryn compiled detailed guides, cataloging thousands of scenarios: rivers, keys, falling stars, goats with improbable manners. These texts offered moral and practical advice, often reminding readers to keep dreams in proportion. Wise counsel when your mind insists on staging nightly operas starring your tax collector. Across Asia, Chinese and Japanese traditions also tied dreams to cosmic rhythms. Chinese texts linked them to the balance of yin and yang, or to wandering spirits. In Japan's Heian court, elegant diarists recorded their visions alongside poetry and court gossip. A dream about chrysanthemums might be followed by a note about who wore an unfortunate sleeve color at breakfast. Dreams were not just private, they shaped politics. Medieval kings occasionally used them as propaganda. "I dreamed the Lord crowned me," one might announce conveniently close to a coronation. Even if the dream involved accidentally dropping the crown into a well, courtiers knew better than to mention that part. Some cultures built physical rituals around dream capture. The Iroquois held dream-sharing ceremonies, treating nighttime stories as clues to community needs. Early modern Europeans sometimes placed sprigs of herbs, rosemary or mugwort, beneath pillows to encourage true dreams. Whether the herbs worked or simply perfumed otherwise dubious bed linens is a separate question. Not all advice was sensible. Medieval dream manuals cheerfully explained that if you dreamed of bees swarming, you should expect a profitable year, unless they stung you, in which case, also profit, but with mild inconvenience. The logic was flexible, which suited clients eager for reassurance. Let's take a drowsy step into the Renaissance, when scholars tried to blend science with the old symbolism. Physicians wrote treatises linking dream content to the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A cheerful dream meant healthy blood. A nightmare meant your black bile had taken artistic license. It's amazing how many ailments were blamed on fluids no one could properly measure. Freud, much later, would declare that dreams were pathways to unconscious desires, which medieval people would have found both obvious and alarmingly specific. They preferred broader strokes. If you see yourself climbing a ladder, success is ahead. If you see yourself falling off, perhaps fewer ladders. It's tempting to laugh at ancient manuals, but their charm lies in how earnestly they tried to make sense of the nonsense we all endure each night. Dreams can be alarming, comforting, or baffling. Everyone wanted an instruction sheet. Picture a quiet, ancient bedroom. An oil lamp flickers, casting long shadows on plastered walls. A sleeper tosses lightly, already halfway to a narrative involving goats, emperors, and a river that somehow sings. In the morning, they'll sit on a stool, rub their eyes, and consult whichever wise neighbor claims expertise. It's oddly reassuring that humans have always woken up wondering, what on earth was that about? So, as you settle deeper under the covers, remember you're part of a long tradition of people decoding their own subconscious theater. Whether your dream tonight is about misplaced shoes or victorious parsnips, someone, somewhere, once wrote a rule about it. Let's drift along from these nighttime mysteries toward the next historical curiosity, keeping our pace slow and the lamp turned low. Hey everyone, still awake? Or pleasantly half gone? Either is fine. Tonight, we're sliding away from temple pillows and dream manuals, out into an entirely different kind of adventure, though we'll keep our pace gentle. No galloping, despite what the title suggests. We're going to talk about the Pony Express, a scheme so bold, so romantic, and so poorly thought through that it somehow managed to work. For about 18 months, the year was 1860. America was in that awkward mood it sometimes adopts, restless, ambitious, and not terribly patient about distance. News and mail crawled westward by stagecoach or wagon, while telegraph wires stopped shy of the Rockies. California, meanwhile, was filling with people who had opinions and wanted them delivered quickly. Someone, inevitably, looked at a map and thought, what if we just threw very fast horses at the problem? That someone was mostly Russell, Majors, and Waddell, freighters who already hauled supplies to army posts and mining camps. They loved a logistical challenge. This new venture would require hundreds of riders, even more horses, and a chain of lonely stations stretching almost 2,000 miles from Missouri to Sacramento. Naturally, they launched it in a hurry, with optimistic budgets and a blithe disregard for how many mountains existed between here and there. The route itself read like a dare. St. Joseph, Missouri, across the plains of Kansas and Nebraska, up through Wyoming and Utah, along the edge of the Nevada desert, finally down the Sierra Nevada into California. Riders were promised adventure, decent wages, and a uniform that was basically whatever doesn't frighten the horse. Applicants were told they should be young, wiry, and preferably orphans, so no one would suit if the job went badly. A hiring poster allegedly said, young, skinny, wiry fellows, not over 18, must be expert riders, willing to risk death daily. Orphans preferred, even by 1860 standards. This was refreshingly direct. The company built or borrowed about 190 relay stations. Some were nothing more than rough cabins, others sturdier barns with a pot of dubious coffee simmering near the door. Every 10 or 12 miles, a rider would swap to a fresh horse. Every 70 or so, another rider took over. Speed mattered. Letters were packed into a special leather pouch, the mochila, that slipped over the saddle so the load could be switched in seconds. Opening day, April 3rd, was staged with suitable drama. Crowds gathered in St. Joseph as a rider, believed to be Johnny Fry, waited beside a glossy bay horse. A cannon fired. The telegraph office handed over the first mail, and off he went into the dusk. On the opposite side of the continent, another courier left Sacramento heading east. Somewhere in the middle, they would trade pouches like two particularly determined carrier pigeons. The service was quick, astonishingly so for its time. A letter could travel from Missouri to California in roughly 10 days. Compared to the usual 3 weeks by stagecoach, this felt almost futuristic. But the reality behind the romance was less polished. Riders faced weather that swung between blistering sun, blizzards, and the sort of prairie wind that could knock hats into the next county. There were rivers to ford, rattlesnakes to politely avoid, and the occasional irritable bison. Hostile encounters with bandits or angry locals were rare but memorable. Some stretches were so empty that the only audience was sagebrush, which, according to several diaries, never applauded. Night rides were particularly eerie. Imagine cantering through Nevada by moonlight. The only sound your horse's hooves and whatever the desert uses for breathing. Stations offered rest, but not luxury. A cot, perhaps, and strong coffee that seemed to have been brewed during the Mexican-American War and left on the stove. Horses were the true heroes. The company spent lavishly on them, selecting agile mustangs and half-breeds bred for stamina. Each animal covered only a short segment, then rested while another took the load. Riders developed quiet friendships with their mounts. Those schedules left little time for sentiment. A typical shift covered 75 to 100 miles. After that, the rider collapsed on a bunk while someone else took over. Financially, the Pony Express was precarious. Rates were $5 per half ounce of mail at the start, enough to make today's postage seem charitable. They dropped to $1 as competition loomed, but the cost of feed, salaries, and replacing chewed saddles never quite matched the income. Russell, Majors, and Waddell kept hoping volume would save them, which is an optimistic way of saying they ignored the math. Meanwhile, technology crept closer. Telegraph lines were being strung across the continent, pole by pole, despite weather, terrain, and occasional sabotage by cows leaning at unfortunate angles. Everyone knew that once wires connected east and west, horses would lose their edge. But pioneers are not famous for caution, so the riders pressed on, delivering government dispatches, love letters, and the occasional desperate plea for someone to send better boots. The roster of riders became a small legend. There was Pony Bob Haslam, who once galloped 380 miles in less than 2 days when his relief failed to appear, an achievement still cited whenever someone boasts about pulling an all-nighter. There was Billy Tate, a teenager who reportedly fought off attackers before succumbing, his mail pouch found beside him untouched, a grim reminder that the work wasn't just scenic sunsets. Women played quieter roles. Some kept stations, tending fires and patching gear while husbands were away. Others offered meals or patched uniforms for passing couriers. Though rarely celebrated, their labor made the whole improbable chain hold together. By 1861, the Civil War brewed in the East, dragging resources and attention. Then, in October, the transcontinental telegraph clicked into life. Messages could now zip from coast to coast in minutes, without anyone needing spare horseshoes. The Pony Express, barely 18 months old, was suddenly an antique. Its closure was oddly quiet. Riders finished their last runs, stations shuttered, and managers turned to more profitable work. Yet the legend persisted, burnished by dime novels and Hollywood, which cheerfully ignored balance sheets in favor of galloping montages. Today, standing at a preserved station, perhaps in Nebraska or Utah, you might find a weathered sign and a bit of wind sighing through cottonwoods. It's hard to imagine the clatter of hooves, the quick exchange of pouches, the young rider vanishing down a dusty track. But for a short span, against odds and geography, the Pony Express tied two oceans together with a string of hoofbeats. And that's the charm. It was never supposed to last forever. It was a bridge, built of stamina and slightly reckless optimism, between the slow world of wagons and the instant chatter of telegraph keys. So, as you settle deeper under the blanket, picture a rider guiding a lean horse across a moonlit ridge. There's a faint clink of metal from the moquila, a smell of sage and leather, and a cool breeze that might carry your own thoughts further west. The story is done, but the rhythm, steady hooves, steady heart, lingers just enough to nudge you toward sleep. Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're still with me after galloping alongside the Pony Express, congratulations on your stamina. Or maybe you've been happily asleep this whole time, which is also an excellent outcome. Tonight we'll take a slower road, one paved not with horseshoes, but with hops and barley, and the occasional clay jar that someone forgot to wash for about a decade. Yes, we're talking about brewing, one of humanity's most quietly revolutionary hobbies. Long before anyone invented spreadsheets or small talk, people were already figuring out how to coax something bubbly and mildly intoxicating from whatever grain was lying around. The results weren't always elegant, but they were enough to convince whole societies that fermentation was worth pursuing, even if it meant dealing with the odd exploding jar. Archaeologists love a good surprise, and few discoveries delight them more than evidence that someone, somewhere, made beer far earlier than anyone thought reasonable. Residues of malted barley have been scraped from stone mortars in what is now Israel, dating back about 13,000 years. Imagine a group of Natufian foragers leaning over a sticky pit of half-sweet, half-sour sludge, and deciding this was a promising beverage. Perhaps they needed courage to taste it the first time, or perhaps they had already been sampling other things that grew near caves. By the time organized farming appeared, brewing had become more systematic, if still a bit slapdash. Ancient Sumerians, around 3000 BCE, elevated beer to near religious status. Clay tablets record recipes that read like a mix of hymn and shopping lists. Soak malted barley, bake it into loaves, crumble them into water, let the mixture sit until it smells right, then strain. Their goddess of brewing, Ninkasi, was celebrated with a hymn that doubled as instructions. Singing your recipe is certainly one way to avoid forgetting the steps, though it does risk confusing anyone expecting a lullaby. The finished drink, called sakaru, was thick, cloudy, and consumed through long straws to avoid chewing sediment. Picture a group of dignified scribes, delicately sipping from a communal pot, pretending the whole thing wasn't just slightly warm porridge with ambition. Egypt soon joined the party. Beer there was as common as bread, and often made from bread, a pleasingly circular economy. Workers on royal building sites were partly paid in daily rations of heket, a malty brew that offered calories, hydration, and just enough buzz to make hauling stone blocks feel like an achievable lifestyle. Egyptian murals show rows of brewers mashing grain, straining liquid, and storing the results in sealed jars, sometimes decorated with hieroglyphs announcing which batch might actually taste pleasant. Elsewhere, the practice branched out with local flair. In China, Neolithic villagers produced a rice and honey beverage at least 9,000 years ago, proving that creative fermentation isn't limited by geography. In South America, people learned to make chicha, a corn beer often started by chewing kernels to release enzymes, a method that sounds unappealing until you remember that all early brewing involved equal parts ingenuity and questionable hygiene. The Greeks and Romans, ever keen on hierarchy, looked at beer with mild suspicion. Wine was their civilized drink. Beer, they thought, was for barbarians and slightly confused farmers. Still, soldiers stationed on the damp edges of empire sometimes brewed their own, muttering apologies to Dionysus while enjoying something less vinegary than local water. Medieval Europe, on the other hand, turned brewing into a communal art form. Monasteries perfected recipes, carefully balancing grain, yeast, and the occasional herbal flourish. Hops joined the mix around the 9th century, offering bitterness and a preservative edge. Monks brewed not only for income, but for sustenance, since liquid bread was conveniently exempt from certain fasting rules. A pint at breakfast, after all, is technically not a meal if your abbot agrees. Women also carried brewing knowledge, particularly in households and small villages. Alewives produced batches for sale, sometimes advertising with a broom or branch over the door, a detail later misread as witchcraft paraphernalia. It's possible that a few pointy hats were merely practical sunshades worn by enterprising beer makers. Brewing's relationship with social order is a recurring theme. Babylonian rulers issued detailed codes on how to price and serve beer, threatening unwise tavern keepers with creative penalties. In some places, selling watery beer could earn a fine or a swift dunk in the nearest river, an early form of quality control that modern breweries might find excessive. Technically speaking, the secret behind all this alchemy is yeast, though ancient brewers didn't know its name. They just trusted that if they left a sweet grain mash alone long enough, invisible forces would reward them with fizz. Yeast spores floated through the air, clinging to pots, settling into wood. Once a lucky batch bubbled, brewers reused part of it to encourage new fermentations, passing cultures along like family heirlooms. The process blurred lines between science, superstition, and minor acts of faith. By the Renaissance, brewing had become an industry. Cities such as Munich, Bruges, and London saw guilds of professionals standardize recipes and set prices. Laws like Germany's Reinheitsgebot, the famous 1516 purity law, limited ingredients to barley, hops, and water yeast, oddly, went unmentioned, perhaps because everyone assumed it came free with the atmosphere. These rules aimed to protect quality and, conveniently, grain supplies for bread. A balance between hunger and thirst has shaped human law more than we often admit. Colonial expansion carried beer to far corners of the world, though not always successfully. Early English settlers in North America, lacking good barley, sometimes experimented with spruce tips or pumpkin. Results were mixed, though modern craft brewers occasionally revive those recipes with far better marketing. Ships rounding the Cape of Good Hope stocked ship's beer, a light ale meant to survive warm holds and occasional storms. Some barrels, inevitably, did not, which is one way to add tension to a voyage. It's worth pausing on the social side of beer. Taverns, inns, and beer halls have long been arenas for politics, gossip, and ill-advised singing. In 17th century London, coffee houses may have claimed intellectual prestige, but alehouses did brisk trade in opinions too candid for polite pamphlets. Across Europe, village festivals relied on local brews, fueling dances, and, occasionally, disputes about who owed whom for the last round. Even as technology marched forward, thermometers, hydrometers, steam engines, brewing kept its aura of earthy patience. Large-scale breweries like Bass and Guinness rose in the 18th and 19th centuries, shipping their product beyond regional borders. Yet the heart of the craft remained familiar. Malt some grain, boil it with hops, cool, add yeast, wait. It's one of the few industries where let's leave it alone and hope for the best is a legitimate production stage. Beer also left a mark on language and art. Toasts, drinking songs, and sly references fill literature from ancient poems to Shakespeare's tavern scenes. Painters captured tankards gleaming beside rustic tables or clutched by monarchs pretending to be approachable. The frothy head of a pint may seem mundane, but it's a recurring emblem of fellowship, mischief, and gentle rebellion against overly sober afternoons. As for taste, our ancestors were adventurous, but not always skilled. Some ancient brews were sweet and nourishing, others sour enough to make a goat reconsider its life choices. Clarity wasn't expected. You drank what you got, sediment included. Over time, refinements like filtration and refrigeration improve consistency, though a certain haze has lately regained fashion among enthusiasts claiming to enjoy authenticity. Brewing's endurance owes much to its modesty. Unlike dramatic inventions, printing presses, steam locomotives, alarm clocks, beer didn't insist on being noticed. It seeped quietly into daily rhythms, harvest celebrations, paydays, endings of long journeys. It has served as consolation, reward, and, occasionally, regrettable decision fuel. And while stronger spirits eventually competed for attention, beer retained a reputation for sociable mildness, provided one respected its capacity for tipping merriment into melodrama. So, as you let your eyes grow heavier, imagine an ancient courtyard at dusk. Clay jars stand in a row, each humming faintly with fermenting grain. A brewer leans against a wall, enjoying the soft, yeasty scent drifting on warm air. Perhaps a neighbor arrives, carrying a mug carved from wood or baked clay. They exchange a knowing glance. Another batch nearly ready. Another chance to toast survival, friendship, or the sheer relief of an evening without chores. Brewing, in all its guises, is really a story about patience and shared comfort. Whether it was Sumerian straws dipped into communal pots or Bavarian monks perfecting lagers, the impulse was the same: to create a drink that turns ordinary grain into a small ceremony. And as you settle deeper into your pillow, maybe that ceremony can drift gently through your thoughts, carrying you, quite responsibly, towards sleep.